The signature was still wet on the contract when Paul Heyman's hand started shaking, not from fear, not from excitement, but from the weight of what he had just done, what he had just set in motion. The decision that would either cement his legacy as the greatest strategic mind in WWE history or destroy everything he's built over the past 4 years as the special counsel to Roman Reigns. Because in that moment, standing backstage at Monday Night Raw with cameras rolling and the entire wrestling world watching through a carefully staged reveal that felt anything but staged, Paul Heyman confirmed what everyone hoped for but nobody actually believed would happen. Brock Lesnar is the 5th member of the Bloodline's WarGames team, the Beast Incarnate, the Conqueror. The one man in WWE history who boasts to absolutely no one and respects even fewer. The same Brock Lesnar who has been absent from WWE television for over a year. The same Brock Lesnar who seemed done with professional wrestling entirely after his last brutal encounter left bodies broken and careers questioned. That Brock Lesnar is coming back. And he's aligning himself with Roman Reigns, Paul Heyman, and the Bloodline for the most brutal match in wrestling history. And if you think you understand what this means, if you think you can predict where this goes, if you think this is just another big name return to pop a rating and sell some tickets, you're not paying attention to the absolute chaos Paul Heyman just unleashed on WWE. Because nothing about this makes sense. Nothing about this follows the established rules of wrestling logic. Nothing about this is safe or predictable or controllable. And that's exactly why it's the most dangerous and brilliant move Paul Heyman has ever made. The announcement came during a segment that started normally enough. Roman Reigns in the ring, undisputed WWE Universal Championship draped over his shoulder, that calm confidence of someone who has been the most dominant force in professional wrestling for years. Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, and Jacob Fatu flanking him. The Bloodline in full force, looking every bit the unstoppable dynasty they've become. But there was tension. You could see it in Roman's eyes. In the way he kept glancing toward the entrance ramp. In how Paul Heyman was pacing at ringside, microphone in hand but uncharacteristically quiet, like someone wrestling with a decision they've already made but still aren't completely sure about. The opposing WarGames team had been running their mouths for weeks. Cody Rhodes leading a coalition of main event stars determined to finally dethrone the Bloodline, to end Roman's reign of terror, to prove that unity and righteousness could overcome tyranny and manipulation. They had their 5 members locked in. They were confident. They were prepared. They thought they had every advantage except sheer dominance. And they were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Heyman began, his voice carrying that familiar cadence that signals something massive is about to be revealed. My tribal chief has asked me to address the speculation, the rumors, the endless questions about who will be the 5th member of our WarGames team. The crowd was electric. Because everyone had theories. Every wrestling podcast, every social media platform, every message board had been debating this for weeks. Would it be a returning legend? A surprise defection from the opposing team? Someone from NXT getting called up for the biggest opportunity of their life? I've heard the names being thrown around, Paul continued, that slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I've read the speculation about who the tribal chief might convince to join the Bloodline for one night. Who might be willing to step into WarGames and ensure that Roman Reigns continues his historic, unprecedented, undeniable reign of dominance. Pause. Long enough for the anticipation to become almost unbearable. Long enough for people in the arena to start chanting names, placing last-minute bets on who was about to walk through that curtain. And I'm here to tell you that every single one of you was wrong. The energy shifted. From excitement to confusion. Because Paul's tone wasn't triumphant. It was almost conflicted. Like he was about to reveal something that even he wasn't entirely comfortable with. The 5th member of our WarGames team isn't someone who wanted to join the Bloodline. Isn't someone who believes in our mission or respects our hierarchy or acknowledges the tribal chief. Another pause. Paul looking at Roman, some unspoken communication passing between them that the cameras caught but the audience couldn't fully interpret. The 5th member is someone who doesn't care about any of that. Someone who operates on one principle only: violence. Someone who I personally convinced to return to WWE for one night, one match, one opportunity to do what he does better than any human being who has ever lived. And then the music hit. Not immediately. There was a beat of silence first. A moment where everyone's brain was still processing Paul's words, still trying to figure out who fit the description. And then those unmistakable opening notes crashed through the arena sound system like an earthquake. Brock Lesnar's theme. The pop was deafening. The arena didn't just erupt, it exploded. Grown men jumping out of their seats. Security barriers shaking from the collective movement of thousands of bodies losing their minds simultaneously. Commentary teams screaming into their headsets trying to be heard over the chaos. And then Brock appeared. No pyro needed. No elaborate entrance choreography. Just 280 pounds of legitimate combat sports credentials and barely contained aggression walking down that ramp like a guided missile locked onto a target. Question for everyone watching: when that music hit, where were you? What was your immediate reaction? Did you think this was possible, or did it catch you completely off guard? Drop your honest response in the comments, because I need to know if anyone actually predicted this. But here's where this gets complicated. Here's where the layers of this decision start revealing themselves, and you realize this isn't just a big name return for shock value. This is Paul Heyman playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns have history. Violent, personal, career-defining history. They've main event multiple WrestleManias. They've beaten each other half to death in every stipulation match WWE can conceive. They've been allies and enemies, partners and rivals, unified by common cause and divided by ego and ambition. Their most recent encounter ended with Roman standing tall, finally defeating Brock. Finally proving he could beat the Beast incarnate clean in the center of the ring without shortcuts or interference. That victory was supposed to be definitive. The passing of the torch. The moment Roman truly became the undisputed top guy by conquering the man who held that position before him. And now Paul Heyman just brought Brock back and put him on Roman's team. Asked the conquered to fight alongside the conqueror. Requested that someone who bows to no one suddenly operate as part of a unit under Roman's leadership. The potential for disaster is astronomical. One wrong look. One perceived sign of disrespect. One moment where Brock decides he's tired of following instead of leading. And the bloodline implodes from within more spectacularly than any opposing team could ever accomplish from the outside. Cody Rhodes and his team were watching from the entrance ramp, and you could see the dawning horror on their faces. Because they'd been preparing for a specific challenge. They built their strategy around facing the bloodline as currently constructed. And Paul Heyman just changed every calculation, every game plan, every assumption about how WarGames would play out. You don't prepare for Brock Lesnar the way you prepare for normal wrestlers. You can't game plan against someone whose offense isn't just scripted moves but legitimate combat sports technique executed with scary precision. You can't strategize around unpredictability embodied in human form. And now you have to face him in WarGames. In the most brutal match structure WWE has ever created. In an environment where Brock Lesnar's particular brand of controlled chaos becomes exponentially more dangerous because there are no countouts, no disqualifications, no escape hatches when things go sideways. Paul Heyman stood at ringside, microphone lowered, watching Brock approach the ring. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second that the cameras caught, you could see doubt flash across his face. The recognition that he might have just released something he can't control. That bringing Brock Lesnar back into this situation could save the bloodline or destroy it completely, and there's no middle ground. Roman's expression was harder to read. Pride at securing such a dominant fifth member. Concern about sharing spotlight and authority. Confidence that he's evolved beyond needing to fear Brock's presence. Or maybe calculation, already thinking 3 moves ahead about how this alliance serves his purposes and when it might need to be dissolved. Solo Sikoa and the others looked simultaneously pumped about having Brock on their team and terrified about what that means for the internal dynamics. Because they've all heard the stories. They've all seen what happens when Brock Lesnar gets bored or annoyed or decides that following orders isn't serving his interests anymore. Here's my question for you: is this the smartest move Paul Heyman has ever made, or the biggest mistake of his career? Does adding Brock make the bloodline unstoppable, or does it plant the seeds for their destruction? Give me your take right now. Let's talk about what bringing Brock Lesnar back actually means beyond just the shock value and the immediate WarGames implications. Because Paul Heyman doesn't make decisions based solely on short-term gains. Everything he does is part of a longer strategy, multiple contingencies planned for every possible outcome. Brock returning legitimizes the bloodline in a way nothing else could. Because as dominant as Roman has been, as thoroughly as he's defeated everyone put in front of him, there's always been that question lingering in the background. Could he do it without Paul? Could he maintain this level without the special counsel's manipulation and strategic planning? Having Brock Lesnar voluntarily agree to be part of Roman's team answers that question definitively. If the Beast incarnate, the one man who has never needed anyone, who has never aligned himself with any faction or authority unless it served his immediate interests, if that man is willing to work with Roman even temporarily, it validates everything Paul has been claiming about the tribal chief's legitimacy. But it also creates a ticking time bomb. Because Brock isn't joining the bloodline long-term. This is a WarGames arrangement. A temporary alliance built on mutual benefit rather than actual loyalty or belief in the cause. And everyone knows that once WarGames is over, once the immediate threat has been neutralized, all bets are off about what Brock does next. Does he simply leave? Does he challenge Roman for the championship, wanting to prove he's still the alpha? Does he turn on the bloodline during the match itself? deciding mid-battle that eliminating Roman serves his interests better than helping him? The uncertainty is what makes this brilliant storytelling, but it's also what makes this incredibly risky for everyone involved. The opposing team's strategy just became infinitely more complicated. How do you plan for Brock Lesnar? Do you focus all your efforts on neutralizing him first, throwing multiple team members at him to limit his damage? Do you try to exploit the potential dysfunction, targeting the alliance's weak points and hoping internal conflict does your work for you? Or do you just accept that you're probably going to lose and focus on surviving, on making sure nobody gets permanently injured, on living to fight another day because facing a fully operational bloodline plus Brock Lesnar in WarGames might simply be an unwinnable scenario? Cody Rhodes is the leader of the opposition, and you have to wonder what's going through his mind right now. Because he spent months building momentum, positioning himself as the one person who can finally defeat Roman Reigns, gathering a team of warriors willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to dethrone the bloodline. And in one announcement, Paul Heyman potentially destroyed all of that, made Cody's heroic mission feel futile, made the carefully assembled opposition team seem inadequate regardless of their talent or determination or unity. That's psychological warfare. That's Paul doing what Paul does best, getting inside opponents' heads before the actual physical combat even begins, making them question themselves, doubt their chances, wonder if they're walking into a massacre instead of a competitive contest. But here's what Paul might be underestimating. Desperation creates its own kind of danger. When you tell a warrior that they can't win, that they're outmatched, that their cause is hopeless, sometimes they fight even harder. Sometimes they take risks they wouldn't normally take. Sometimes they accomplish the impossible specifically because everyone said it couldn't be done. Cody Rhodes has already achieved the impossible once, ending Roman's title reign at WrestleMania in some timelines, proving that the bloodline can be beaten when the right person with the right motivation refuses to quit regardless of odds. Adding Brock Lesnar might not guarantee victory. It might just guarantee that when Cody's team does achieve victory, it becomes even more legendary because they overcame something that should have been insurmountable. Real talk question: if you were on Cody's team right now, would you be terrified, motivated, or both? How do you mentally prepare for something like this? Comments section, let me hear from you. Let's examine the historical context that makes Brock's return so loaded with meaning. Because this isn't just about current storylines. This is the culmination of decades of wrestling history intersecting in one match. Brock Lesnar revolutionized WWE when he first arrived. Freakish athleticism combined with legitimate combat sports credentials. A Paul Heyman guy who became the youngest WWE champion in history. Someone who made violence look effortless because for him it was. He left WWE at the peak of his career, walked away to pursue UFC, and proved he was the real deal by becoming UFC heavyweight champion. Validated everything about his WWE presentation by succeeding in actual combat sports where the opponents weren't cooperating and the outcomes weren't predetermined. When he returned to WWE years later, he returned as something different. Not just a wrestler playing a character, but a legitimate fighter who happened to work in professional wrestling. Someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone because his credentials were established in environments where credentials actually mean something. That status gave him unprecedented freedom, part-time schedule, massive paydays, the ability to choose his opponents and his matches, a position above the normal roster hierarchy because he existed in a category of one. Roman Reigns' entire character has been built on challenging that paradigm, on proving that full-time dedication and political savvy and strategic alliances can match or exceed pure physical dominance, on becoming tribal chief not just through beating people but through unifying a family, commanding loyalty, building a dynasty. Brock and Roman represent different philosophies of what makes someone the top guy in WWE. And their matches have always been about more than just championships. They've been about which philosophy is correct, whether the ultimate warrior or the ultimate politician deserves to rule. And now they're temporarily setting that aside to unite against a common enemy. Which raises the question, does this resolve their philosophical differences or just postpone the inevitable next chapter of their rivalry? Paul Heyman is the connection point, the advocate who managed Brock for years, the special counsel who currently serves Roman, the manipulator who has played both men, aligned with both men, benefited from both men at different points in his career. His loyalties have always been fluid, based on who serves his interests at any given moment. Right now those interests are served by having Brock and Roman working together. But Paul has betrayed Brock before, multiple times, in ways that created some of the most shocking moments in modern WWE history. Does Brock remember? Does Brock trust Paul, or is he simply using this opportunity for his own purposes while remaining ready to cut ties the moment it benefits him? The layers of psychology and history make this so much more than just a WarGames team announcement. This is decades of storylines and real-world relationships and wrestling business politics all converging into one pressure cooker situation that could explode at any moment. The backstage segment after Brock's music hit was equally revealing. Roman and Brock face to face for the first time in over a year. No words spoken. Just a stare down that communicated volumes about respect, rivalry, temporary alliance, and future conflict all simultaneously. They didn't shake hands, didn't embrace, didn't do any of the typical visual shorthand that signals unity and teamwork. They just acknowledged each other with the bare minimum of interaction before Brock turned and walked away, his participation confirmed but his loyalty very much still in question. Paul Heyman watched this exchange with visible anxiety, because he knows both men better than they know themselves. He knows Brock's capacity for betrayal when it suits him. He knows Roman's paranoia about threats to his position. He knows that managing this alliance through WarGames and beyond will require every manipulation skill he's developed over 30+ years in professional wrestling. One wrong move and it all falls apart. One moment where Brock feels disrespected or Roman feels threatened or Paul's manipulation becomes too obvious, and instead of the bloodline plus Brock being an unstoppable force, they become the most spectacular implosion in WWE history. The rest of the bloodline is caught in the middle. Solo Sikoa has been positioned as Roman's enforcer, his right-hand man, his most trusted family member. How does he feel about Brock suddenly occupying that same space, even temporarily? Does Solo see this as questioning his value or doubting his capabilities? Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa have been working to earn respect within the bloodline hierarchy. They've proven their loyalty through violence and dedication. Does Brock's arrival diminish their status? Do they resent an outsider being brought in for the biggest match when they've been there grinding every week? Jacob Fatu is the newest member, still establishing himself, still trying to find his role within the group. Does Brock's presence help him by taking pressure off or hurt him by making him even less visible in a team suddenly dominated by two megastars? The internal dynamics are a minefield, and Paul Heyman has to navigate all of them while also preparing for the actual WarGames match and managing Roman's ego and keeping Brock happy enough to not just bail before the pay-per-view. It's an impossible job. Which is probably why Paul Heyman is the only person in WWE who would even attempt it. Question time: what's the bigger threat to the bloodline, their opponents in WarGames, or their own internal dysfunction with Brock on the team? Where does the real danger come from? Let me know your thoughts. Now let's talk about the match itself. WarGames with this lineup isn't going to be a normal wrestling match. It's going to be a legitimate war where careers end and legends are made and everyone involved pays a physical price that might take years to fully recover from. 2 rings. One massive cage surrounding both. No escape. No countouts. No disqualifications. Just pure combat until one team achieves victory through pinfall or submission. But the real brutality comes from the structure itself, the steel that becomes a weapon, the space that limits movement while also creating opportunities for spectacular violence. Brock Lesnar in WarGames is a terrifying prospect for everyone, including his own teammates. Because Brock's offense isn't just athletic, it's genuinely dangerous. When he suplexes people, they don't just bump safely. They get ragdolled in ways that risk legitimate injury even with cooperation and protection. In WarGames, where weapons are encouraged and the environment itself is a hazard, Brock becomes exponentially more dangerous. Imagine him using the cage as a weapon. Imagine him hitting F5s on the exposed steel between the rings. Imagine him deciding that a standard German suplex isn't violent enough and creating something more brutal in the moment. His opponents should be terrified. His teammates should be almost as concerned. Because Brock doesn't have an off switch. Once the match starts, once his combat instincts take over, he doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy. He just sees targets and responds with overwhelming force. That's what makes him effective. It's also what makes him uncontrollable. The opposing team will have to make hard decisions. Do they try to neutralize Brock immediately, knowing that requires sacrificing multiple team members to subdue him? Do they try to outlast him, hoping his limited cardio compared to full-time wrestlers becomes a factor in a long match? Do they try to create situations where the bloodline's internal tensions cause Brock to turn on his own team? Every strategy has merit. Every strategy has risk. Because you're not strategizing against a normal opponent. You're trying to outwit and outfight someone who has succeeded in actual combat sports where preparation and planning only gets you so far before raw ability and fighting instinct takes over. Cody Rhodes has to decide how to deploy his team. Does he save his best for the end, hoping to outlast the bloodline's initial onslaught? Does he send in his most physical member first to set a tone and try to neutralize Brock before momentum shifts entirely? Every decision matters in WarGames. The order of entry, the timing of moves, the choice of when to use weapons versus when to rely on wrestling technique. All of it becomes exponentially more complicated when Brock Lesnar is part of the equation, and the bloodline has to figure out how to actually utilize Brock effectively while also managing the chaos he brings. Do they send him in early to establish dominance? Do they hold him back as a secret weapon for when the match seems to be turning against them? Roman will want to control this. Will want Brock to follow strategy and work within the team structure and acknowledge Roman's leadership at least for the duration of the match. But Brock doesn't follow strategies that aren't his own. doesn't work within structures that limit his effectiveness, doesn't acknowledge anyone's leadership when violence becomes the language being spoken. That's the tension that makes this so compelling. The uncertainty about whether the Bloodline plus Brock is an unstoppable super team or a disaster waiting to happen with the timer counting down. Paul Heyman will be at ringside, unable to enter the cage, unable to physically intervene when things start going sideways, just watching and hoping that his gamble pays off, that the temporary alliance holds long enough to achieve victory, that he can somehow manage personalities and egos and violence from outside the structure that contains all of it. For a man who has built his career on manipulation and control, WarGames with Brock Lesnar on his team represents the ultimate test. Because in that environment, with those stakes, with that much chaos and violence and legitimate danger, control becomes an illusion. You can only hope that the forces you've set in motion move generally in the direction you intended. The historical significance of this match is already established before it even happens. Because when has WWE ever assembled this level of talent, this concentration of main event star power, this combination of different wrestling styles and philosophies and generations all competing simultaneously? WarGames itself is already special. Adding Brock Lesnar to the Bloodline makes it potentially the most stacked team in the match's history. And the opposing team has to match that or risk the match being completely one-sided, which serves neither team's narrative interests. One more question before we push toward the conclusion: will Brock Lesnar make it through WarGames without turning on the Bloodline? Can this alliance survive the entire match, or is betrayal inevitable? Place your bets in the comments. Here's what happens next. The weeks between now and WarGames become a powder keg. Every interaction between Roman and Brock, every decision Paul Heyman makes about strategy or positioning, every moment where the Bloodline's internal hierarchy gets tested by Brock's presence. The opposing team will try to exploit this. Will cut promos questioning the alliance. Will point out that Brock and Roman have spent years trying to destroy each other. Will suggest that Paul Heyman is playing both men for his own benefit and neither should trust him. And they'll be right. But being right doesn't mean they can actually turn the truth into tactical advantage. Because as dysfunctional as the Bloodline plus Brock might be, they're still exponentially more talented and dangerous than almost any team that could be assembled to oppose them. The build to WarGames becomes about whether this temporary alliance can hold together long enough to achieve its purpose. Every week creates new tensions, new reasons for Brock to question his involvement, new opportunities for Roman's paranoia about threats to his position to manifest in destructive ways. Paul Heyman will be working overtime, managing egos, smoothing over conflicts, redirecting attention toward the common enemy whenever internal fractures start showing. It's a full-time job keeping the Bloodline functional on a normal day. Adding Brock multiplies the difficulty exponentially. But Paul signed up for this. He made this decision knowing all the risks and complications. He believes the payoff is worth it. That having Brock on their team for WarGames creates such an overwhelming advantage that it's worth every headache and hazard that comes with managing him. And he might be right. The raw talent assembled on the Bloodline side of this match is staggering. Roman Reigns at the peak of his powers, Brock Lesnar bringing legitimate combat sports credibility, Solo Sikoa as a wrecking ball enforcer, the Tongans and Jacob Fatu providing depth and specific skill sets. On paper, they should win, easily, overwhelmingly, in a way that makes the opposing team look completely outmatched despite their own considerable talents. But wrestling isn't fought on paper. It's fought in steel cages with weapons and grudges and unpredictable human emotions fueling the violence. And in that environment, anything can happen. The match itself will be remembered for years regardless of outcome. Because the combination of talents involved, the stakes established, the history between participants, all of it creates a perfect storm of wrestling storytelling converging in one brutal, spectacular, career-defining battle. Careers will be elevated. Legacy.